Hello, everyone. Welcome again to another edition of The Last Defense. This is your host, Hanino Navi, and we have on a very special guest, a member of the UFAA, which stands for the United Front Against Austerity. We have on special guest Alain Lareau. He is a member of the UFAA Maryland branch, as well as the member of the Glass-Steagall Command Post, an online community that blogs and creates a recipe for healing the sick nation that we are dealing with, economically as well as socially. So, Alain Lareau, please give us an introduction of yourself and tell us a little bit about how you became involved in these projects to begin with.
Sure. Thank you, Hano, for letting me come on and helping or trying to. The UFAA, United Front Against Austerity, was something that was tied together and launched as an organization in October of 2012.
Mm-hmm.
This was in response to a call from Dr. Webster Tarpley that there's a certain economic issues and economic rights around what most people would remember as a New Deal coalition that had its heyday throughout the late 40s and then the 50s, and it kind of got attacked and collapsed in 1968 timeframe. So his proposition was to renew this and to unify this. And he knew that, we all knew that we had to fight against the austerity cuts that were coming down the pike. We were all in agreement in terms of what we had foreseen at that time, what we're living in right now. So that was the impulse that put us together back in October of 2012. What I could tell you next would be that the flagship or the main element of our platform and program was decidedly the 1% Wall Street sales tax.
Mm-hmm.
It was decided that there's so much hocus pocus going on in the shadow banking world in terms of things like derivatives, credit default swaps, and many other things by many other names, but all that most people in the know would recognize as the things that caused the economic crisis of 2008 to begin with. These things are still running loose, running amok, and in some cases they're double or triple the quantity in play than there had been then. So the 1% Wall Street sales tax aims at pushing much of what is in the shadow banking world into the light of day, so you can actually see what they're doing and address whether or not these kinds of things are healthy for an economy or not. But moreover, use the revenue created from such a small tax to stop all budget cuts in their entirety. Put the austerity agenda, halt it in its tracks.
Mm-hmm.
And that got us going. And so over the last couple of months, we've had a great amount of luck in many areas. But now our fight and our concerns are centering around Elizabeth Warren's proposition in her bill that she has submitted. Was it May 8th?
Mm-hmm.
The proposition is that for 1 year's time, beginning in July, to avert the interest rates for Stafford loans from moving from 3.4% to 6.8% in July, that they be brought down to a rate of 0.75%.
Mm-hmm.
And that the money that would be funding these loans come directly from the Federal Reserve. In other words, that the proposition is that the Stafford loans are financed by a something akin to the discount window at the Federal Reserve. And Elizabeth Warren used specific language when she submitted the bill in her presentation of it, that if the Wall Street banks can have 0.75% money at the discount window, which I believe is named the federal funds rate, then why should not students? Now, our friend Dr. Tarpley has been adamant in his suggestion that the banks, the zombie banks, he calls them, the hedge fund hyenas, get this low percent money. This borrowing rate for this low percentage, even though they are the riskiest things going.
Right.
In other words, the market forces, so to speak, will come out and say, well, these students are risky propositions. And so Dr. Tarpley says, no, stop that argument dead in its tracks. The risky propositions are continuing to loan the money to these zombie banks, but you continue to do it. So don't even, try to make it sound like these students are risky.
Right. And I've heard...
oh,
sorry, yes. Continue.
Well, we really like that idea. We like that fighting spirit. In other words, we've got a whole laundry list of all the complaints that we know are going to come at Elizabeth Warren, and we have 3 to 4 talking points for every one of the other talking points that of the other side of the argument. We have all the tools anyone would need if they had the guts to stand up and fight against the austerity and fight for the right of college students to have low-interest loans and the right to an education. We've got lots of the tools.
Yeah,
and that's our message. We want to get out to people. Come get the tools we have for you.
Yeah, it's a wonderful thing you guys are doing. I've taken a look at some of the website, and I've also sat in on some of the conference calls that you guys normally organize to discuss policies. It's very, very amazing. Excuse me?
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's fun. I love to get involved in any way I can. I know I'm very, very far away from the fight, but I feel like I want to still, participate in whatever way I can. So this is one of the ways I can try to do it along. Mike, he's also been an avid member of this. He's been a member of the UFAA, I think, since its inception, as well as he's been talking with Tarpley via kind of like a mentor. He's kind of like being mentored by Tarpley as well as the other members.
I understand. Yeah. Our membership, our group is quite varied. We are not. There's no one piece of the political spectrum not represented. We have people from all walks of life. We get along great, and we actually enjoy the fact that we can trade a so-called left-wing viewpoint with a right-wing viewpoint and get out of the let's just say there's a fictitious paradigm shoved down our throats, and we're rejecting that.
Yes.
So, that's probably why you like it so much.
Yeah, it's the left-right paradigm, the bipedal monster of politics.
Right, we're not buying into that in the least.
No, not at all. I think this is a good form of direct democracy, which is, practiced in various parts of the world, parts of Europe, parts of America. It's a more participatory democracy where it's like, how do we make these policies work for everyone? And regardless if someone has an opposing viewpoint, it's a good contribution nevertheless, because it can help us even hone in whatever policies that we want to create. And it comes through dialogue.
Well, we're fairly confident in we have faith in ourselves that we know what the real enemy is. One way to label it would be to say it's international finance capital.
Right.
That has no regard for the nation state or the democratic process of any people on the planet.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we can see that evident in a lot of issues and cases with Monsanto, where they're actually writing the laws for people. Their tentacles have been spreading far and wide into the United States government, especially with the FDA.
There you go.
Yeah.
So any political group that can recognize the inappropriateness of this left-right paradigm and can operate outside of it and independent, automatically see eye to eye with us. And all groups, no matter what level they're actively fighting on, can find a place under the umbrella of the UFAA. Not that we are bossing them around. We're not. We're just being the backdrop of the coalition's fabric. That's our intended purpose. Mm-hmm. Be the connection pathway for all of these groups.
Yes. And that's what people need. They need a platform to be able to speak about these topics, or at least to address them. And that's how you can develop legislature based on what people need, instead of having representatives do all the work for us, and which is why there's a disconnect between Congress and the people that they're supposedly elected to represent anyway. I think this is a great platform. Something
comes to mind that seems that's the right thing to interject at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And another point that Dr. Tarpley is adamant about is the purpose of the organizing, the political activity has to, and the program that we frame has to impact on the ability for people to live and get by,
mm-hmm.
or that the program be concrete enough that it has impact on people's it has direct impact on people's lives,
mm-hmm.
their benefit, which is why they would connect with the program, the movement, or the coalition. And that do not be naive. That if the whole point of political action is, and political activity of any kind, is you must seize power. You must be afforded a place at the table. That's the way they used to say it years back.
Mm-hmm.
But at this point, we're saying that, looking at the way Frederick Douglass articulated it,
mm-hmm.
Power concedes nothing without power confronting it.
Absolutely.
So, lots of folks might have great ideas, and we won't push anyone away because their ideas don't seem to fit. But we do measure people's willingness to integrate into a movement that will actually seize power, gain political power, get a place at the table, not get pushed around, have a say-so, and have a program that actually will make it possible for you to live tomorrow. Because that's what we're confronted with. These budget cuts coming down the pike the way they are.
Yeah,
many people's future existence is in question.
Yeah, they're dangerous. It's the cutting of Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, cutting of the ability for people to get a fair education. Once they graduate, you're chained to this debt. It's centralization of federal power, and I know,
student loan debt. The list is very long.
Right, and the fact that the Federal Reserve is a privatized entity, it has a lot of private shareholders, which makes it predominantly private. It creates the illusion that we have this federal system, this federal institution that is working to the benefit of people by stopping recession, when in fact all they're doing is creating a superficial adjustment to the inflation, as well as to the fixing of interest rates. And that's the one thing that we're trying to bring to light, especially working with this particular organization as well as. Yeah.
Right. Thank you for that. That is an appropriate next thing to bring up in the discussion. There's an education level of this kind of movement. I think, scratching the surface, you could say people don't understand what money is. We need to teach them about what is money, what is a money system, what is not a money system, that sort of stuff. What is real economics? But that's not good enough. But in describing the Federal Reserve System as something that is an institution that has the possibility of answering to the needs of the public,
mm-hmm.
And then people aren't aware of that. It seems that anybody that knows anything about the Federal Reserve System is very clear that it's not part of the government and it's run by a cartel of independent bankers in the back rooms. But in the front room, at least by law, they have to obey the Congress if the Congress tells them what to do. So now we have the predicament that the Congress doesn't know what to tell them to do, even if it had the guts to tell them.
Mm-hmm.
So we're trying to address that. If you would muster the courage to tell the Federal Reserve what to do, what would you tell them? Well, we'd say that you must use your credit-creating capability to finance the future.
Right.
Where the private sector banking establishment that's in your back room won't. By law, we want the Congress should say, by law, we want going to make you do it.
Mm-hmm. I was looking at some things.
Now, how many people do you actually know that will say, there are many people complaining about the Federal Reserve System. They say, end the Fed.
Mm-hmm.
But we're saying that would be out of the frying pan pot into the fire.
Yeah, out of the frying pan into the fire.
Yeah. Because the one shining ray of hope in this whole situation is even though the Federal Reserve System was created, how you could maybe say, by sleight of hand, or everybody was out of town. And
the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 would kind of be a sleight of hand issue.
Yeah, so people that have any savvy about what the Federal Reserve is and how it got started, well, you can say to them, the one ray of hope in this whole thing is that when the Congress has the guts to tell the Federal Reserve to create some new credit and utilize your credit-creating function in these ways, and instead of funneling this credit to zombie banks, hedge fund hyenas, and creating speculative bubbles in whether it's home mortgage or now the proposition is in student loans.
Right.
Right, because that's what they're actually proposing. They want to have the student loan rate set to a floating market where essentially LIBOR is going to rig, your student loan payment.
Right.
Now we're saying, hey, you fooled us once with the mortgage floating rate fiasco. You're not going to fool us twice with the student loan floating rate. So we're fighting tooth and nail on this one.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Absolutely. I remember looking at some of the C-SPAN. Oh, sorry.
Well, when you're playing chess and you play a move that attacks in two different directions at the same time, they call it a forked threat or something. Well, you can do this in politics. So by using the student loan problem as the central feature of our organizing, we can talk about the Federal Reserve, what it could do. We can talk about the impulse of our hijacked Congress wanting to have student loans set to floating rates and how that's a fiasco. We can talk about how we need to not only finance the college students' education, but we can finance the infrastructure renewal of the whole country if you can once and for all decide that the Federal Reserve's credit creating capability is going to be directed for these concerns and needs. And it goes on. So in other words, there's much more involved.
Mm-hmm.
Even if we're just talking about students and student loans, you can bring in the Fed. You can bring in why it's bad, what it could be, how could it be used in a good way. And if we break the ice on this, if the cat gets out of the bag, the faucet is wide open for credit creation for schools, hospitals, highways, irrigation systems, helping the family farmer. We could beat Monsanto. We could. The future is very bright.
Right.
If people focus on turning this credit creating ability
into something productive.
Right. And seems to be the big missing ingredient that most of our population in the U.S. has never heard of such a thing.
Yeah, I can tell you a few examples. Like, for instance, you were talking about infrastructure development. Now, the question for me is, if we have the world's largest economy, which their primary economy and industries are energy, arms dealings, and prisons. We have only one high-speed rail, and it operates in the northeastern part of the United States. I think it's between Boston, New York, and Washington, D.C., as it says here on Wikipedia, but also it's not a very fast one. We could be investing in those types of infrastructures. I've lived in East Asia for a while, and in Tokyo, there's a high-speed railway system extensively throughout the country, as well as South Korea, as well as China. And these are projects that they invest in. Number one, they have a high population density, so they need to keep the roadways clear. But also because of these certain lobbying groups that exist in the United States, they're not going to want to invest in projects like this. They'll stop bills and they'll stop proposals to have these types of infrastructure development policies set in place. But at least with taxing derivatives, if we decide that we're going to have a speculative market, then we need to at least regulate it so that some of that revenue is coming back. And the problem that I see with it is if we're going to have some kind of change, we need to start with small steps. The 1% Wall Street sales tax, I think, is an amazing concept because at least that brings some of the money back home. Oftentimes, people will speculate on markets and they'll use derivatives as a means of saying, okay, it's going to rain tomorrow. No, it's not going to rain tomorrow. Okay, sign this contract. And one person loses and the other one's like, I got your money. And that's just a contract between two people, two stock traders, two people working in Wall Street, two people working in London, and none of that money ever really goes back. It centralizes a lot of the money within the people who are doing the trading. They're betting. It's not producing anything, which goes to my other point that I wanted to ask you about. There's one of the policies of the UFAA that is basically working towards creating a more production-based society in the United States to bring some of the jobs back. Can you tell me a little bit about the policies regarding that?
Well, we have the program as we've described it on the website is part of it's defined as emergency measures, and that's mainly the take back the Fed idea, make the Fed extend the credit that we need, a Hamiltonian bank idea. Mm-hmm. And the Wall Street sales tax. There are other parts of the program that are not defined as emergency measures, but they could be defined as background or backbone economics,
Mm-hmm.
there are listed such things as right to health care, rights to education, but also in terms of actions. We want a mortgage moratorium. We want student loan moratorium.
Mm-hmm.
We're looking at ideas like health care for all.
Mm-hmm.
The single-payer initiative is good, but we'd like to have it under a different name, health care for all or Medicare for all. And let's just mention proper import tariffs.
Yes, yes.
Right, to stop the gap in NAFTA and stuff like that. And I think the other thing I'm sure you wanted to bring up is the parity pricing for farmers.
That's right.
I think it's fine for farmers to use futures contracts to try to lock in a successful price for their crops, but we don't want in this unregulated situation, commodities and futures exchange markets are haywire.
Mm-hmm.
So we want to alleviate the pressure on the farmer, promise him or somehow some parity price for essentially this could be described as making sure that the price of his crop cannot be pushed below the cost of producing it.
Absolutely.
So find some minimal profit margin for a guy that's going to grow corn. How much should his corn crop cost at the barrel head, so to speak? Because this is what it costs in terms of electricity, fuel, fertilizer, water, all of the ingredients, including the farmer's education,
Right.
And and the cost of him developing his workforce. Just don't say, well, the farmer can hire somebody to just pick the food and then send him on his way after the harvest is done.
Yeah, there's an actual science.
Some farmers can rely on some portion of their workforce to be migratory, but
Mm-hmm.
but you cannot be 100%.
Right, absolutely.
You got to have some indigenous intellectual capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
You hold close to you. So there's a cost of the education in terms of your food that comes on your plate is a direct result of, like you said, the energy market has a relationship, but the education
Mm-hmm.
of some guy or gal is impacting upon the price of the food on your plate. So
Mm-hmm.
parity pricing aims at alleviating not just the pressure from international markets bringing in cheap food, through the elimination of tariffs,
Mm-hmm.
but it also addresses the aspect of the speculation in the futures market can attack the food production at home.
Right, right.
So these are important things, but they're in the backdrop. And here's the other one final idea I think we should hone in, and that is when we're saying we're fighting, we want serious fighters and serious organizers and activists to help us form this coalition, this larger unit. We're not saying to be overly practical or overly pragmatic. We're asking people to be realistic in that don't ask for when you're fighting on these terms for these issues, don't go overboard. In other words, you've got to say, I want to build this coalition, which means I have to be a little flexible, but I can't ask for, the crown jewels. I can't be demanding something that you can't win.
Right.
Right? So when we're coming to this idea of the Wall Street sales tax, some people could say, holy moly, those things are all bad. Let's tax them at 10%, 20%.
It's not going to work.
Well, okay, I agree, right? But the idea, so that we pin the idea of the Wall Street sales tax to 1%. One reason, because it's an easy number everybody can relate to. It can be on the tip of your tongue very easy, 1%. Don't have to pull out your calculator a lot of times when you're figuring out stuff. But it also means that we're not being pushovers either. Mm-hmm. Because we've seen other people proposing something similar, but the rate of tax that they're proposing is not even 1/10, 1/20th, 1/50th of what we're saying. Now, again, a good reason for keeping it at 1% would be, well, you've got some negotiation leeway. Mm-hmm. Maybe our congressmen and women and representatives in Congress will actually put a bill through and be something like maybe 1/4 of 1%. Hey, that's good enough. Mm-hmm. But if we don't fight for the 1% tax, we'll probably never get anything close to 1/4%.
Right, and those things can always be repealed, and you
right.
want to at least have a substantial effect when it first or initially comes into power.
Right. And likewise, if we ask for too much, then we blow people out of the coalition because they just won't take you serious. You think and many organizations do this. They fight for pie in the sky stuff that is not realistically achievable.
Right.
So we've got to push that away too. So we're trying to. Amazingly, we're trying to find a middle road.
Right.
Yeah.
And I was going to do the math, but I'm not sure if I have the calculator or the mental capacity at this time of night to do it. But we have a derivatives market of essentially about $1.8 quadrillion floating around in the world.
Okay,
which is
1%,
equal.
Just knock off 2 zeros.
Yeah.
From your original number.
Okay, so 1.8 billion. No, that's not even it. That's not.
If you started with 1.8
quadrillion. Quadrillion, yes.
Knock off 2 zeros, and you end up with 18 trillion.
18 trillion, yeah. Okay, there you go. My mental math is terrible tonight. But imagine what we could do with that money, though. It's amazing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and this is the one of the hardest things, is that once your mind can wrap around the idea that no budget cut is necessary in any way, shape, or form, mm-hmm. This is murder. Right.
Well, the austerity attacks that people want to have, especially the things that are happening in Europe as well as the United States, parts of Australia as well. When you implement austerity, it doesn't do anything to kickstart the economy again. There's no production happening with austerity. It's saying we're going to fiscally cut back, but without implementing the plans and processes to keep the economy stable, keep people in production, and keeping them with jobs. If you don't spend a little money...
A strong argument can be made that austerity makes it worse and that you'll be in a worse budget situation the next year.
Absolutely.
You can also further hone the argument down that since the budget cuts are necessary, because you could have a tax that would balance the budget.
Absolutely.
Moreover, this is honed. It hones down the idea that this is murder.
Yeah, it is. It's not only just murder of the individual people that exist within a nation state, but it's also the murder of sound economic policy. It's like, in my opinion, I've been reading a bit of In the Fed by Ron Paul, and he says that, number one, he wants to end the Fed, and number two, he wants to create a system of austerity where we spend money wisely. I think those are pretty good policies, but they do need to be adjusted. In fact, if you bring central banks back into the power of the people by nationalization, which is one of the policies of the UFA as well, it brings revenue home. It also forces them not to print as much money than they can spend. Otherwise, the nation state is threatened. When you look at situations in Zimbabwe, or when you look at situations in, what's another country? Uganda, where they would print money using the central printing press. And it basically made everything completely worthless. Like, you literally could use the money for toilet paper. When you look at the Deutschmark after the fall of the Weimar Republic, that was another issue where they were printing money just to kind of keep up with the repayments.
It's interesting you bring this up, because there's another angle of this stuff. It has to do with national sovereignty.
Right.
And it does mean that in order for any nation to have a viable currency, they must have foreign exchange rate controls.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not praising or alibying anything that happened in Zimbabwe, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
But if Zimbabwe didn't have the power to control the rate of currency exchange, then it's difficult for any competent economist to say what parts of what Zimbabwe did were good and what parts of what Zimbabwe did were bad. Mm-hmm. How can you analyze that anything that went on? Because what we've seen over the last 20 years, the same folks that had been watching the Federal Reserve, and if they were supporters or followers of Ron Paul, and said that they knew that the hocus pocus that was going on in central banks around the world was bad.
Mm-hmm.
Are these not the same people that should have said, that the international currency speculation is part and parcel of the same problem, but somehow overlook that? Or am I wrong? Am I reading them wrong?
Well, I know Ron Paul mentions a lot about the derivatives market, showing that it's a strict correlation between derivatives usage and hedge funds and the development of the Federal Reserve's printing press.
But in their free trade, Adam Smithian, John Bircher, Cato Institute type economic dogma, they say that for anyone to impose a currency exchange rate control is anathema to their system. Am I wrong? Is that not what they say?
I need to read more on it, but I'm going to assume yes, that's the case.
In other words, it happened in Malaysia. It happened in Japan.
Okay.
It happened numerous places all over the globe in the last 20 years. You've seen people like George Soros, who the right wing correctly attack and ridicule and complain on, has run currency speculation operations. Right.
Yeah.
So part of the right dialogue is to say that, and this is what we do in the UFAA, is some of the things my right wing friends say are correct, and some of the things that are wrong. And likewise to the left wingers, and we say, well, don't you see how they've set us up to be arguing on these points? Mm-hmm. Let's just determine what is true from each person's point of view, and see if we can have people in the middle adopt those things as tenets of their program. So I'm literally telling my Ron Paul supporting type friends, they've got to jettison a huge chunk of what they think they know as economics from the Austrian school, around these guys like von Mises, von Hayek, these types of people, especially who comes out of the John Birch Society and other stuff. They've got to jettison a huge part of that.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's no one particular philosophy that can speak for, everything. There's no one particular paradigm.
Well, there is. It once was called the American system around guys like Henry Clay.
Mm-hmm.
which many people don't know about.
Yeah. What specifically does he entail?
So, if you want to go down the road in what kind of education on economics the UFF or the UFAA or myself even would advocate, somewhere along the line you have to say things like the Glass-Steagall, having the firewall between speculative banks and hometown Main Street banks, and the tariffs, and the currency exchange rate controls are all almost as if they were cell membranes. Where, no, the metaphor being that the cytoplasm is there at the use of the cell's own needs from the existence of these structures, like the cell membrane. Your economy is, there's these structures in your economy, like the Glass-Steagall, the currency exchange rate controls, tariffs on imports, even union labor issues come into play in the idea of structures like this, because now you're supporting elements of the cell's cytoplasm in terms of the workforce. You're saying, you can't bleed yourself to death from internally. In other words, what if the cell ate itself, right? Because it couldn't recognize its own parts.
So we call cancer.
Right. So when you take away the right to unionize, your cytoplasm is going to eat itself, metaphorically.
Right.
So I'm simply saying that the idea of the American system of economics has to think in terms of dynamic movement of energy, knowledge, people, not just commodity prices at statutory, or how would you say, static statistical value. Right? I put in a casino chip, I made a bet, and I get out a casino chip that's worth more. That's not economics. That's gambling.
And,
right?
I live in an area where there's a lot of business school students, and a lot of them do tend to focus on the speculative market. They talk specifically amongst themselves about derivatives and doing stockbroking and trading, which is not a real reflection of the actual market. These types of interest rates, these types of stocks can be fixed in order to create conditions where people can make derivatives trading a lot easier for themselves. They will do insider trading as well, which destabilizes pretty much everything. They also have computers that have algorithms, which allow them
high-speed trading, right?
Yeah, and the computer algorithms trade based off of values of the particular stock market at any given time, which makes more volatility in the market. So when you have a combination of these things, it's like we live in a society where people think that it's okay to propagate that particular system without there being any long-term repercussions. I'm totally against it. I think that people have to return to a more sound policy of saying to themselves, how am I spending money? How am I investing it? And how are the institutions, how sound are the institutions that are basically housing my money? Is FDIC going to be something that lasts, 5-10 years down the road? And how do we take back the ability to save and to spend wisely and to invest without it caving in as an economic system?
Right. Well, what do you think of my metaphor of the cell membrane? I know it's kooky. People have never heard such a thing. But to categorize things like Glass-Steagall, currency exchange rates, controls, tariffs, all in a category of structure of protection, or at least the metaphor tries to drive the mind to see that, well, if a cell didn't have a membrane, how could it keep its cytoplasm there for its own use? In other words, you wouldn't have any logistics in the chemical world of of microbiology. You know, a virus could walk up and say, "Hey, I'd like to have that thing there," and just take it.
Yeah, it makes
it's just what these economic vultures do.
Yeah, it makes total sense. One example of the membrane that you're talking about is, as I'm living in China, Chinese government actually has regulations specifically targeting derivatives transactions. I'm reading particularly off of an article from the Paul Hastings attorney's office. It was published in April 2004, and I've heard this also before. Basically, China has set up regulations so that they don't have people trading derivatives unnecessarily because they have central planning systems that help them to reach their target goals every 5 years. So the problem that derivatives would do, it would hinder that progress. I'm not saying that central planning systems are necessarily the most effective way to do things, but I would say that if you want a society or an economic model for your country, you have to make sure that there are certain regulations which control the kinds of transactions that happen, because the kind of instability that derivatives offer to the United States, as well as the European, as well as the Australian and New Zealand economic systems, is that it creates total instability based off of quick fix earnings and income. So a stockbroker can say, okay, I want money now. We're not going to think about what
that's what a virus would say.
Exactly.
A virus would say, look, I've just multiplied myself, 35 million times.
Yeah, without thinking about the death of the host. With the death of the host, there's no more virus.
But right, from the virus's point of view, it's excellent work, right?
Pretty much. I mean, that's what it lives for. Without that window into the future, yeah. It's amazing. It's amazing how people think in general, like when it comes to the inherent greed that happens with a lot of the traders. I'm not saying that all traders are bad or all traders want to work specifically with the derivatives market with the intention of creating this kind of chaos and instability, but it happens very often. And without regulations on the market, without bringing back the Glass-Steagall Act of they pretty much abolished it in 1999, correct?
Yeah.
And without that kind of regulation,
Leach-Bliley, right?
Right. Without that kind of regulatory system set up, there's no way to actually say this is going to have any kind of future. There won't be any kind of future with money going nilly-willy and also going offshore. With the different free trade agreements that you talked about.
Well, in terms of the Glass-Steagall, think of two flywheels, each having inertia. And the flywheels come together and rub a little bit, and sometimes inertia can be transmitted from one to the other. Now, what if one gets bigger in terms of its volume of turnover? Now, remember, now we're thinking dynamically instead of statistically, right? So one is getting bigger, it's getting more momentum, but the derivatives bubble or anything on that side of the... Well, let's put it another way. Let's call one flywheel financial instruments, and let's call the other flywheel monetary instruments. And let's decide how these two flywheels rub together, off and on, sometimes very hard, sometimes not. As the interactions between these things we know as financial instruments and monetary instruments. There are differences. So now we're highlighting the differences between those kinds of things. And we're focusing on the interactions those kinds of things have. And now we see that if the derivatives bubble gets so big, and it gets a lot of inertia, but it's draining energy from the monetary instruments. So in order to keep up, you have to add energy to the monetary instruments. So when you're creating money out of thin air, like QE3, to feed the bubble, you see how the Federal Reserve System is injecting monetary instruments so that financial instruments can be expanded in value
Right,
but
right.
their value expansion is a fictitious expansion.
Yeah, and we see that in the exchange rates and also the rate of the quality, not the quality, but the price of gold and other commodities, because those
again,
are fixed.
Right, same thing.
Yeah.
Right. Because you can have a futures contract on gold that is a financial instrument.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
You can have a price put on delivery of gold.
Mm-hmm.
That would be like a monetary instrument.
Right. Yeah, they want to lock in those extra rates, like someone locking in the juices of turkey they marinated overnight, and unfortunately, it doesn't work the same way. So
Right. Now, here's another. The analogy can be viewed from stocks and bonds. Your stock portfolio doubles in price because certain buyings and sellings have tickled the market in such a way that there's more demand for that stock. Has any of the physical nature of anything that those companies, those stocks represent, has it changed? Has a cow gotten fatter? Have employees built a new machine and put in a new production process that has somehow related to that increase in stock price?
right.
No, it's a fictitious financial instrument increase.
Yeah.
So what if I want to cash out? If I'm actually or borrow against my value in my stock portfolio. So now we're talking about monetary instruments. When I go sign a promissory note at the bank based on my stocks for collateral. So here's a fictitious increase in financial instruments that causes an increase in monetary instruments. So if you have Glass-Steagall in place, it simply makes it impossible to convert certain kinds of financial instruments into monetary instruments.
Yeah, absolutely. When there's an excessive supply of Federal Reserve notes, and again, there's a complete difference between a U.S. note and a Federal Reserve note, one being the national representation of wealth and one being a foreign entity printing money for the money that...
So if they want to gamble on their financial instruments, they can. But when they lose, the loss stops there.
Yeah.
So the takedown of Glass-Steagall has enabled them to take losses in financial instruments or fictitious winnings, convert them into monetary instruments, and run away with the cash.
Right.
And leaving in its place an expanded money supply that is only it can be considered an inflationary effect only because there hasn't been any physical production increase to match with it.
Right.
I myself have no problem with increasing the money in play as long as it's matched with an increase of productive capability or surplus of production.
Yeah.
So in other words, if a farmer has exerted himself for the purpose of profit, okay, he wanted to make an extra buck. He's exerted himself, and now he's created a surplus on his farm. But if there isn't a hungry person with $1 in his hand, ready to tickle the market and say, I'm hungry, here I am, feed me, the food will rot on the farm.
Absolutely.
So there are legitimate reasons to create currency and maybe spend it into the economy without having it be attached to a debt instrument.
Right.
In other words, it's not a balance sheet item of spending from a balance sheet, so that there has to be appropriation of revenue and you're directing it. No, there's a certain kind of economic activity where a government could create money out of thin air, spend it based upon its deliberate intention of matching that new currency with the existence, the bringing into being of a surplus somewhere. that it has recognized there is. Now, I'm not saying this should be done on a great ratio, great percentage.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just saying that if, in clear terms, if your population increases 2%, shouldn't your money supply in circulation increase by 2%? Even if you're going to have 2% more people entering the workforce, and 2% more people are going to be cashing checks at the bank teller?
Right. It's got to match.
Right. Now
Yeah,
you get it, see?
it's got to match something. It's got to match either the commodities that are available. It's got to match, the population. It's also got to match the productive force, like you were saying. But the problem is they use the system of fractional reserve banking, which basically is not matched with any particular commodity or any specific need.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to talk about. There's a lot to investigate. There's a very broad, everything under the sun can come up into the discussions for the recipe for economic revival and rescue.
Mm-hmm.
But only certain actions and activity are appropriate when you're talking about bringing it to bear in the political arena to seize power from what's killing us.
Yeah, that's exactly what we need to do. I did want to ask you one thing before we wrap things up. I want to ask you specifically, what are some of the types of ways that you have implemented your strategies to, appeal to the public, to try to introduce laws and bills? Are there any specific methods that you've used? I know that you've participated in demonstrations in the areas. You've set up meetup points.
It's a very good thing to bring up. Thank you. Yes. What needs to be highlighted is we are calling for action by college students themselves.
Mm-hmm.
They must be active on their campus in clear, forceful solidarity with Senator Warren on her bill. To the degree, if you want to get your Occupy Wall Street friends in there and occupy a building, well, at least now you can get them involved in occupying for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
Or get your faculty involved and get someone that's going to be a speaker at your commencement activity to highlight Elizabeth Warren's position in her bill, and so that the graduates are not leaving the school out into the world having somebody just paying lip service to the idea of you getting an education, you're paying a lot of money, you're going into debt for nothing.
Right.
No, it's got to be for a reason.
Mm.
And so we have not only the students, but the faculty and the people that they bring in for the commencement address show a commitment that, yes, it's costly to get you educated, but it's a worthwhile thing to do.
Mm-hmm. And
we're going to have a very strong effort to put this in the media, put this in the public eye, make this the centerpiece for all political discussions on all TV channels and all news networks. And this has to be done because, well, we know that the news media is just as hijacked as the government is, or our banks are,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Privatization of all things.
Thank you for bringing that up. That would be the best closing concern.
Yeah. It's really a group effort. This is merely a platform, but it's got to get done with the intellectual class as well as all people working in the working class as well, and just get out there and fight for what makes sense for the future of not just ourselves but our children, our future progeny, whatever you want to call it. But I think it's as I would say, a damn good start to getting everything off the ground, especially during these crazy and difficult times. So I just want to go over some of the information for everyone out there that's listening. I would like to cover some of the websites and the links related to the United Front Against Austerity. We have the actual website. It's http:// againstausterity.org. That's AGAINSTAUSTERITY.org. We also have all of the Twitter feeds. They have a Facebook webpage, as well as what other things do they have?
I might believe that the againstausterity.org website needs no hyphen.
No,
in fact,
no hyphen.
You might even, if you enter it into your browser, you may not even need to enter the HTTP or the www. You can enter againstausterity, one word, .org, and most browsers will bring you straight to the site.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Also, I want to just make a quick note about the recipe, which is very important. This is Alain Lareau's. This is your group for Yahoo, as well as the Glass-Steagall command post, which I'll also be posting those in the notes for the show.
Okay, thank you for that. That site would be available for people that want to correspond with essay length, composition length banter. So if they just want to send a tweet, well, then use Twitter. You know, if you've got a little bit more to say, then you can find a YouTube video that's got some content around what we're doing. Get the message to other people that way. Facebook users are welcome to look for our Facebook page.
Right. Yeah, getting connected through social media, that's going to be the very important tool that we have at our disposal. So, like I said, I'd just like to wrap things up. Thank you so much, Alan, for coming in on
start the barbecue.
What's that?
My kids are in the kitchen here trying to get me involved with starting the barbecue grill.
They're like, Dad, hurry up, I'm hungry. Okay.
Yes, thank you for allowing me to participate.
Thank you so much.
I'm sure that there are many others in the UFAA group that would love to participate as well and could probably do a much better job than I've done.
No.
And if the invitation is extended to those folks as well, they would be delighted. And I thank you on their behalf as well.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor to conduct this. It was kind of a spur of the moment thing. I was like, oh God, where's Mike? But, I think everything that we need to, have there to introduce the organization has been covered very well. So I thank you again for your knowledge, your expertise.
Okay, I'm glad I try to do a good job for you. Maybe in the future I can have Skype working and the microphone at the computer, and maybe you can do this again.
Okay.
But I am sure that I believe Kyle, who might be on the conference call tonight.
Yes.
Would like to chat with you. He'd be willing to do an interview next.
Okay.
In fact, that I would probably, if I could gently insist it or request it, I would say, please. Kyle's a very sharp guy, and you'd want to have him do a shout out to folks on these things.
Okay, wonderful. I'll try to get that arranged, and we'll take the next step. So once again, everyone listening to the podcast, this is The Last Defense with your host, Hanno Navi. Sorry, had to go solo again tonight. We were interviewing Alain Lareau on the policies of the UFAA, which is the United Front Against Austerity. We will post the relevant links and Twitter feeds, as well as the Facebook page. So thanks again for tuning in. This is The Last Defense signing out. Take care.
All this love and trust, building a castle of nothing. All this love and trust, building a castle of nothing.